Hello and welcome to Qualitative 2013, live from Valencia. Absolutely delighted to be joined by Andrew Soren and Stacy Graiko. Guys, would you first of all like to give a little bit of introduction to yourself? We'll go ladies first with Stacy.
Sure, thanks, Jack. So I work for Firefly Millward Brown. Firefly is Millward Brown's qualitative practice, and I'm based out of the U.S. With the office in Norwalk, Connecticut. I'm a director in the qualitative practice.
Great, and my name's Andrew Soren. I'm one of Stacy's clients at BMO Financial Group, which is one of North America's top 10 banks, and I specifically work in the field of qualitative research for employees, understanding what our employee voice is within the organization.
Brilliant. Now, you guys are doing a paper tomorrow and doing a presentation. Just interested for you guys to tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I'll just sort of set up the genesis of the paper. So as qualitative researchers who do research in a variety of different settings, it can be online or offline, or at Firefly we have a signature ethnography offering called live streaming. We were kind of taking a look at the different types of research we do, and we noticed that sometimes there are conversations that are very lively, very engaged, where the respondents, give really good data, and other times conversations where they're not so great, right? So maybe they're kind of dull, or they feel like they're, dragging, by, and we don't get as great data and insight out of those conversations. So we were kind of wondering what was going on, what was the difference between those really great conversations and the really sort of dull and boring ones. So we turned to positive psychology, which is something that Andrew and I have really been immersed in for the last year or so.
Stacy and I just both graduated from this program at University of Pennsylvania, which is an investigation into positive psychology applied in the real world. And positive psychology is basically the study of what happens when things go right with people. So if you think about psychology as this discipline that looks at people who are sick, people who are normal, and people who are gifted, and you think of that on a spectrum from, let's say, -10 to +10, most of psychology over the last 100 years has really focused below the zero. What's going on when people are sick, and how can we fix the problems that they have, which is really important, but ultimately the world's not made up of just problems. There's really good stuff that happens in the world, and positive psychology really looks at what's going right with people and how can we get more of it.
I mean, every day, right? People make art, and goals are scored, and people give great interviews or presentations, right? Hopefully. So, we wanted to look at those people and see what was going on when those people were having those really, really great achievements. And so one of the things that we identified was happening during that time is positive emotions, right? And so by positive emotion, I mean things like hope and gratitude and love and amusement, inspiration, joy, right? There's been a lot of research on positive emotions and on emotions sort of in general. But what we found when we looked at the literature is that there are several specific positive emotions that can lead to the kinds of outcomes that we want in qualitative research. And those outcomes are things like engagement, verbal fluidity, the ability to express oneself creatively. Those are really the things that we want to zero in on and that are happening in those really great encounters with consumers. And we wanted to know how to have more of that in our qualitative research.
Yeah, one of the major figures in positive psychology that we looked at is this woman named Barb Fredrickson. And she's spent her whole career studying positive emotions, and specifically what happens in our bodies and minds when we experience something amazing, something awesome, or joyful, or hopeful, or something that really sparks our imagination. And basically what happens is that when we experience those positive emotions, there's a whole bunch of chemical responses that happen in our body. Like, for example, oxytocin, which is the same chemical that people experience when they're cuddling, or that women's experience when they're breastfeeding. It starts to surge in our bodies when we experience positive emotion. Or similarly, our parasympathetic nervous system, the thing that controls our heart rate actually lowers. Our lungs start to take in more oxygen. We start to hear more in nuanced ways. We start to see more. And all of that leads to what Barb Fredrickson scientifically calls glitter dust in our brains, which is basically, if you looked at an fMRI when somebody's going through a positive emotion, their brains light up. Their neurotransmitters start making all of these connections. And they literally start becoming more creative. They develop better relationships. They literally start to have all of these incredible outcomes. And that glitter dust, what it does is it associates the brain to anything that caused that positive emotion to happen. And you want to replicate it. You want to press replay. And so it's what Barb Fredrickson calls broaden and build. It's broadening our perspectives, our psychological, our physical, our intellectual, our social resources, and it wants us to build. So we want to associate and press replay and experience the next positive experience that leads to more positive emotion emotions, and the next positive emotion, and the next positive emotion, and pretty soon we're making these great relationships. We're having an amazing time. We're coming up with all of these brilliant ideas, and we really wanted to figure out how can we replicate that intentionally in qualitative research.
So what we did to bring this down to a really practical level is we looked at all of the research that's been done in academic settings around positive interventions. Those are specific, deliberate things that you can do to increase positive emotions. And we took those and we matched them up to qualitative research settings, and we've come up with some methodologies, some tools, if you will, that can help to turn on that positive emotion at the time we need it to turn on. Now, again, there are many positive emotions, and they each have a slightly different effect. So we looked very deliberately at the positive emotions that could cause the kinds of effects we need to in qualitative research settings. So, you know, one positive emotion, one outcome, and one intervention specifically that we can use in qualitative research. And that's really what our paper is about and what we're going to be talking about tomorrow. We'll share more of those examples, and the outcomes are really, you know, wonderful. They speak for themselves, but since they're not here to do that, I'll let Andrew, as the client, kind of say, you know, his experience on some of the outcomes.
Yeah, sure. When we have done these interventions in the qualitative research settings that we've done, we've really noticed that that respondents are way more verbal. So they come up with a whole lot more interesting ideas, and they're way more engaged, and they walk out feeling great. And from the client side, that means that we get way richer data from the focus groups and qualitative research that we're doing. We have better outcomes, and we ultimately generate much more commitment to our brands when for the individuals involved in the qualitative research, because they really love that experience and talking about that brand, and so it's a win-win for everybody.
That sounds really fascinating. And so for people who want to kind of tune into your presentation and follow the SOQual hashtag and see any kind of live reaction that's going on, what time is it?
Yeah, I think that our session's starting right after lunch, so I believe that everyone's coming back around 2:30. Our presentation's going to be probably around 3:05 in the afternoon.
Okay. Brilliant. Guys, thank you very much for joining me, and I look forward to seeing this presentation tomorrow.
Thanks, Jack.
Thanks, Jack.
Cheers.